Faith Through the Fire, 6 Stories of Trust in God. Introduction. Life is full of challenges. At times we face situations that seem impossible, moments when we feel overwhelmed, discouraged, and unsure of what to do next. It's in these moments that we can look to the stories of the Bible, where men and women just like us faced trials far greater than their strength could handle. Yet, time and time again, they found courage, wisdom, and strength by trusting in God. These biblical heroes were not immune to fear, doubt, or suffering, but they chose to believe in the promises of a faithful God. From prison cells to lions' dens, from facing giants to the wilderness of despair, their lives remind us that we are never alone in our struggles. When we trust God and walk in faith, He will guide us through even the darkest valleys. Just as He did for them, God will do for us. These stories inspire us to keep moving forward, knowing that with God, there is always hope, and with faith, no obstacle is too great. As we delve into these 6 powerful stories of victory through faith, let them encourage your heart and remind you that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The same God who delivered His people in the past will deliver you as well. All we need to do is trust in Him, just as they did. 1. Joseph. From prison to the palace. Joseph's story is one of betrayal, false accusations, and long periods of waiting. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, Joseph's life took a dramatic turn from being his father's favorite son to a slave in Egypt. To make matters worse, after resisting the temptations of Potiphar's wife, he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. In prison, Joseph could have given in to despair, questioning why God allowed such misfortune to befall him despite his faithfulness. We can relate to Joseph's experience when we face betrayal or injustice in our own lives. Whether it's being mistreated by someone close to us, falsely accused at work, or enduring hardship that seems unfair, we too can feel lost. Yet Joseph continued to trust God. He served faithfully even in prison, never losing hope that God had a greater plan for him. Just as Joseph was eventually elevated to a position of power, where he saved not only Egypt but also his own family from famine, we must remember that God is working behind the scenes. When life seems unfair, we can trust that God sees our situation and will bring about good even from what others meant for harm. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Genesis 50:20. In our darkest moments, we can hold on to the truth that God is always working for our good, even when we can't see it. Like Joseph, we can keep our faith knowing that God's timing and plan will bring us through to the other side. 2. Moses. Leading through the wilderness. Moses was called by God to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. But this task was anything but easy. When Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go, God sent plague after plague to convince him. Finally, when the Israelites were allowed to leave, they found themselves trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's pursuing army. In that moment of desperation, with nowhere to turn, God showed His power by parting the sea and allowing them to cross on dry ground. We often face situations where we feel trapped, just like the Israelites. Whether it's financial trouble, strained relationships, or personal setbacks, we sometimes feel like there's no way out. The Red Sea in front of us may look like an impassable barrier, but just as God made a way for Moses and the Israelites, He can make a way for us. We may not know how or when, but we can trust that God will provide the path forward. For 40 years, Moses led a nation that was often rebellious and discouraged, yet he continued to trust in God's promises. Moses never gave up on his mission, even when the people around him doubted. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. Like Moses, we face situations that test our patience and endurance. We may feel overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility or the length of time we've been waiting for breakthrough. But God asks us to trust Him, to be still, and to let Him fight for us. He is faithful, and His promises will come to pass. 3. Esther. Courage to save a nation. Esther, an orphaned Jewish girl living in exile, was chosen to be queen in a foreign land. When a plot was uncovered to destroy all the Jews in Persia, Esther was faced with a life-or-death decision. Approaching the king without being summoned could cost her life, yet remaining silent would mean the destruction of her people. Esther's dilemma resonates with the decisions we often face in life, when we have to stand up for what is right, even when it's risky. Whether it's speaking up in the face of injustice, taking a bold step of faith in our careers, or defending someone in need, we can find courage in Esther's example. She trusted God with her life and used her position of influence to save others. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Esther 4:14. We may find ourselves in situations where we are called to act courageously, trusting that God has placed us where we are for a purpose. Like Esther, we can draw strength from knowing that God is in control, and when we step out in faith, He will guide and protect us. 4. David, a shepherd. Defeating a giant. David was a young shepherd boy when he faced the giant Goliath, a fearsome warrior who had paralyzed the Israelite army with fear. Armed with only a sling and 5 stones, David's strength came not from his own ability, but from his unwavering faith in God. He believed that God would deliver him, and with 1 stone, David brought down the giant. We all have giants in our lives, obstacles that seem too big to overcome. Whether it's a difficult boss, a health crisis, or a personal struggle, these giants can make us feel small and powerless. But David's story reminds us that when we place our trust in God, He gives us the strength to face even the biggest challenges. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. 1 Samuel 17:37. David's faith wasn't based on his own strength, but on the knowledge of God's faithfulness. When we remember how God has been with us in the past, we can find the courage to face the giants in our future. 5. Job. Faith through suffering. Job's story is one of unimaginable suffering. A man who had everything, wealth, family, and health, Job lost it all in a series of tragedies. His friends accused him of hidden sin, and his wife urged him to curse God. Yet Job, though confused and heartbroken, refused to abandon his faith. In the end, God restored Job's fortunes, blessing him even more than before. We often face seasons of suffering and loss that leave us questioning why God allows such pain. Whether it's the loss of a loved one, financial devastation, or a prolonged illness, we can relate to Job's deep sorrow and confusion. However, Job's story teaches us that God's ways are higher than ours, and that, even in suffering, God's love and purpose remain constant. Though He slay me, yet will I hope in Him. Job 13:15. Job's faith reminds us that even when we don't understand our circumstances, we can trust God's character. He is a loving and just God, and in time, He will bring restoration and healing. 6. Daniel. Faith in the lion's den. Daniel was a man of deep faith who prayed to God daily, even when the law forbade it. His enemies, jealous of his favor with the king, conspired to have him thrown into a den of lions. Yet Daniel continued to trust God, and God delivered him by sending an angel to shut the mouths of the lions. In life, we often face situations where standing up for our faith is risky. Whether it's peer pressure, workplace challenges, or cultural opposition, it can be tempting to compromise. Daniel's story encourages us to remain steadfast in our faith, trusting that God is our protector, no matter the consequences. My God sent His angel, and He shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Daniel 6:22. Like Daniel, we can trust that God sees our faithfulness and will protect us, even in the most dangerous circumstances. When we honor God, He honors us. Epilogue: the strength to endure and overcome. In life, we all face trials, moments when the road seems long, the burdens heavy, and hope seems distant. But these stories from the Bible remind us of a powerful truth. Even in the darkest times, God is with us. Like Joseph, we may face betrayal and hardship, but God can turn our pain into purpose. Like Moses, we may find ourselves standing before a sea of impossibility, but God will make a way. Like Esther, we may be called to risk everything, but with faith, we can save nations. And like David, though our giants may seem insurmountable, with God by our side, they will fall. The struggles we face are real, but they are never bigger than our God. He promises to give us strength for the journey, courage for the battles, and peace in the storm. When we trust in Him, we can endure anything, knowing that we don't fight our battles alone. God goes before us, stands beside us, and surrounds us with His love. But thanks be to God, He gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. 1 Corinthians 15:57. It's easy to feel defeated when life is hard, but in these moments we must remind ourselves of the same truth that empowered these biblical heroes: God is our strength. Even when we feel weak, His power is made perfect in our weakness. 2 Corinthians 12:9. We are not called to fight these battles with our own strength, but with God's. The same God who parted the Red Sea, who shut the mouths of lions, and who conquered the grave.
Life is full of challenges. At times, we face situations that seem impossible, moments when we feel overwhelmed, discouraged, and unsure of what to do next. But in these moments, we can draw strength, courage, and wisdom from the stories of the Bible. Men and women just like us faced trials far greater than their strength could handle, yet they found courage and strength by trusting in God. In every generation, people face struggles that seems insurmountable. Whether it's financial hardship, emotional turmoil, or personal loss, life often feels like a battle against the flames. And yet, history teaches us that in the face of these trials, faith in God has been a constant source of strength and hope for those who dare to trust. While the challenges of the modern world may look different from those of decades past, the need for divine guidance and the reassurance that God is in control remains unchanged. This story follows Emily Parker, a woman navigating the trials of today's world, yet drawing on the same faith that sustained people through wars, economic depressions, and personal tribulations in previous eras. Her journey through uncertainty, fear, and hardship mirrors the challenges faced by countless believers throughout history. Through her story, we see that faith isn't just about expecting miracles, but about finding God's presence in the everyday moments, trusting Him through the darkest valleys, and emerging from the fire stronger and more resilient. Emily's story is a reflection of the timeless truth that God's faithfulness endures, even in the face of modern-day struggles. Just as people in the past relied on God's strength, provision, and guidance, Emily discovers that the same God who walked with believers then is walking with her today. Through the fires of life, she learns that faith, tested and refined, becomes the foundation for a life of purpose, peace, and unwavering hope. Faith through the fire, a journey of trust in God. Chapter 1. The beginning of the storm. Life has a way of throwing storms at us when we least expect them. For Emily Parker, the storm came in the form of losing her job. As a single mother of two, the thought of losing her only source of income was enough to paralyze her with fear. The rent was due, bills were piling up, and she didn't know how she was going to provide for her children. She had always been a strong woman, but this time, the weight of the world seemed too heavy to carry alone. Decades ago, people faced similar trials. The Great Depression had left families across the world struggling to make ends meet, just as Emily was now. But just as they did then, Emily knew where to turn for strength. She remembered her grandmother's words: "When life gets too hard to stand, kneel. And that's exactly what she did. Late at night, with her children asleep, Emily fell to her knees in prayer, asking God for guidance and provision. She didn't know how things would get better, but she trusted that God had a plan, just as He did for those who came before her. Chapter 2. A Flicker of Hope. The next morning, as Emily went about her routine, she felt a sense of peace that had been missing for weeks. It wasn't that her problems had disappeared overnight, but she felt a flicker of hope deep within her heart. She opened her Bible and read the words of Isaiah 41:10. "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." That day, Emily decided to trust God fully, despite her circumstances. She sent out resumes, called friends, and applied to jobs, knowing that God was working behind the scenes. Like the Israelites who wandered through the wilderness, unsure of their future, she felt the weight of uncertainty. Yet, she believed that just as God provided manna for them, He would provide for her family too. Chapter 3. When Faith is Tested. Weeks passed, and the bills continued to stack up. Emily had gone on several interviews, but none had resulted in a job offer. Doubt began to creep in, and her faith started to waver. She wondered if God had forgotten about her. Every day seemed to bring new challenges. Her car broke down, her son got sick, and the landlord issued a final notice for rent. In modern times, we often feel as if we are fighting battles on all fronts, much like those in the past who struggled through wars, economic hardships, and societal upheaval. Emily found herself in a similar place, battling fear and discouragement. But instead of giving up, she remembered the story of Job, a man who lost everything but still trusted God. Job's faith was tested in ways that seemed unbearable, yet he never let go of his belief that God was in control. Emily realized that, like Job, she needed to trust God, even when life didn't make sense. Chapter 7. A Door Opens. One morning, after months of searching, Emily received a call from a company she had interviewed with weeks earlier. They offered her a position. Not just any position, but one that paid more than her previous job and allowed her to work from home, giving her the flexibility to be with her children. It was a moment of overwhelming gratitude and relief. Emily saw this as a direct answer to her prayers and the culmination of God's faithfulness. It reminded her of the story of Joseph, who endured years of hardship before being elevated to a position of power in Egypt. Like Joseph, Emily realized that the season of waiting had been preparing her for this new opportunity. Chapter 8. The Lessons of the Fire. With her new job and a renewed sense of purpose, Emily reflected on the lessons she had learned through her season of struggle. She realized that faith isn't just about trusting God when things are easy. It's about trusting Him in the fire. The trials had refined her, much like gold is refined by fire. She was stronger, more compassionate, and more reliant on God than she had ever been before. Throughout history, people have faced fires of different kinds, whether literal, like the 3 men in the fiery furnace, or metaphorical, like the trials of daily life. But each time, those who trusted in God came out stronger, and their faith was a testimony to those around them. Emily's journey had become just that, a testimony of God's goodness in the midst of hardship. Chapter 9. Sharing the Journey. With her faith strengthened, Emily felt a new calling on her life, to share her story with others. She started a blog to encourage single mothers and those going through tough times. She wrote about the importance of faith, the power of prayer, and the beauty of trusting God through life's storms. Her words resonated with people from all walks of life, as they too were facing their own battles. In modern society where it's easy to feel isolated, Emily realized the power of vulnerability and connection. Just as the early Christians shared their stories and supported one another, Emily found that sharing her journey helped others find hope in their own struggles. She was now a beacon of light, pointing people toward the God who had carried her through the fire. Chapter 10. A Life Built on Faith. As Emily continued to navigate life, she knew that more challenges would come. But she no longer feared the future. Her faith had been tested, and it had come out stronger. She had learned to trust God not only in the big moments, but also in the everyday trials of life. She had built a life grounded in faith, knowing that no matter what came her way, God was with her. Just as people of faith throughout history had endured trials and emerged victorious, so too had Emily. Her story was a reminder that no matter what fires we walk through, whether financial struggles, health crises, or battles of the mind, God is always faithful. He walks with us through the fire, refines us in the process, and brings us out stronger on the other side. And in the end, it is faith that sustains us, giving us the strength to keep moving. Another very inspiring story is that of Daniel. Listen and be blessed in Jesus' name. Introduction. Faith in the Fire. Chapter 1. The Beginning of the Storm. Introduction. Faith through the flames. Life is full of unexpected twists, turns, and challenges that test the very core of who we are. From heartbreak to financial struggles, from personal loss to the overwhelming pressure of modern life, we find ourselves standing in the fire, searching for hope. Yet, throughout history, countless individuals have navigated these very same struggles, leaning not on their own understanding, but on the unfailing promises of God. Whether in ancient times or today, the foundation of faith remains a beacon of light, guiding people through the darkest of days. This is the story of Daniel Reed, a man living in the fast-paced world of corporate America, facing overwhelming personal and professional challenges. While the pressures of modern society may differ from the battles of previous generations, the human need for divine strength and guidance is timeless. Just like those who have walked through their own fires in the past, Daniel learns to place his trust in God, discovering that no matter the challenge, faith has the power to transform fear into courage, chaos into peace, and confusion into clarity. Daniel's story, like so many others, reminds us that while the trials of life are inevitable, God's presence is constant. In the midst of stress, disappointment, and uncertainty, Daniel finds that faith is more than a comfort. It's a lifeline. His journey mirrors the experiences of countless believers throughout the ages, proving that even in today's world, God's faithfulness never wavers. Through the fires of life, Daniel finds the strength to persevere, knowing that with God by his side, there is always hope. Chapter 1. A Career on the Brink. Daniel Reed had spent the last decade climbing the corporate ladder at a fast-growing tech company. To outsiders, his life looked perfect. He had a prestigious title, a six-figure salary, and all the trappings of success. But beneath the surface, Daniel was struggling. The pressures of his high-demand job were taking a toll on his mental and physical health. He was burnt out, overwhelmed by impossible deadlines, and weighed down by a sense of impending failure. At home, things weren't much better. His marriage had hit a rough patch, and the stress from work was bleeding into his personal life. The sleepless nights and constant worry left him feeling disconnected from his wife and children. Despite his best efforts, Daniel felt like everything he had worked for was starting to unravel. In his quiet moments, he began to question whether the sacrifices he made for his career were worth the toll it was taking on his soul. Much like the trials faced by people in the Bible, Daniel's situation felt impossible. The weight of expectations, both self-imposed and external, left him feeling as though he was walking through fire. But in these moments of despair, Daniel remembered the faith that had carried him through tough times in the past. He hadn't prayed in a long time, but something in his heart told him that now was the time to turn back to God. He knelt by his bed one night and prayed for guidance, not knowing how, but trusting that God would hear him. Chapter 2. A Crisis of Faith. Daniel's prayer that night wasn't met with an immediate answer. The following day, his problems at work only intensified. The project he was leading fell behind schedule, and his boss was breathing down his neck. His colleagues were growing frustrated, and Daniel felt like he was on the verge of losing everything he had worked so hard for. Doubts crept in. He had turned to God, but nothing had changed. If anything, things seemed worse. Like so many others who face challenges today, Daniel found himself in a crisis of faith. He questioned whether God was really there, whether he truly cared about the everyday struggles of life in the modern world. Daniel was reminded of the story of Job, who faced unimaginable suffering and loss, yet never turned his back on God. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. Job 13:15. Daniel whispered to himself as he sat at his desk, trying to calm the anxiety swirling in his mind. He realized that faith doesn't mean the absence of hardship. Job's story, and the stories of so many others in the Bible, showed him that faith is about trusting God through the struggle, not expecting a life free from it. This revelation didn't immediately solve Daniel's problems, but it gave him a sense of peace. He was reminded that God's timing and ways are higher than his own. Though he couldn't see a way forward, Daniel knew that God was working behind the scenes, just as he had for so many before. Chapter 3. An Unexpected Turn. 2 weeks later, Daniel was called into a meeting with the company's CEO. His heart raced. He feared this was the end of his career, that all his hard work would be undone in an instant. But to his surprise, the CEO didn't berate him for the delays in the project. Instead, the CEO revealed that the company had decided to move in a new direction, which meant they would be pausing all current projects, including Daniel's. It was a massive relief, and one that Daniel hadn't seen coming. In the days that followed, Daniel began to see this unexpected shift as God's intervention. The pause in his work allowed him to take a much-needed break. He spent more time with his family, working on the strained relationship with his wife and reconnecting with his children. The weight he had been carrying for so long began to lift. The fire wasn't completely gone, but Daniel felt as though he had been given a moment to breathe, a chance to realign his priorities. He thought of Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Daniel couldn't see the full picture of what God was doing, but he knew he needed to trust that this pause was part of a greater plan. He realized that in the hustle of trying to control every aspect of his life, he had forgotten to surrender to the one who was ultimately in control. Chapter 4. Rebuilding Relationships. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel used the unexpected break to work on his relationships. His wife, Sarah, had been patient with him, but the distance between them was undeniable. They had drifted apart over the years, their connection buried under the weight of Daniel's career and the stress that came with it. Now, for the first time in a long time, Daniel had the space to truly listen to her and to reflect on where they had gone wrong. They began having honest conversations that were painful at times, but necessary. Daniel apologized for the years he had prioritized work over their family, and Sarah opened up about how lonely she had felt. Their relationship wasn't healed overnight, but little by little, they started to rebuild the trust and intimacy that had been lost. It reminded Daniel of 1 Corinthians 13:4-7, a passage often recited at weddings but rarely lived out in the day-to-day grind of marriage. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Daniel knew that love wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice, one that required effort and selflessness. He began to see his marriage as a reflection of his relationship with God. Just as he needed to invest time and energy into his faith, he needed to do the same for his relationship with Sarah. Slowly but surely, they began to feel like partners again, walking through the fire of life together with God at the center of their marriage. Chapter 5. The Fire Rekindled. With his family life on the mend, Daniel started to feel a sense of renewal. The pause at work had not only given him time to reconnect with his loved ones, but also with himself. He had spent so long defining his worth by his career that he had forgotten who he was outside of the office. Daniel decided to use this time of uncertainty to deepen his relationship with God, seeking his guidance in every aspect of life. He began spending time in prayer each morning, reading the Bible and journaling his thoughts. Slowly, Daniel felt his spirit rekindle. He remembered how, as a young man, he had dreamt of doing something meaningful with his life. Not just for himself, but for others. The corporate world had consumed him, but now Daniel sensed a new calling on his heart. His success had come at a cost, but perhaps God was leading him toward a path where he could find both purpose and balance. As Daniel prayed for direction, he was reminded of Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. This verse had always been a source of comfort, but now it felt like a promise specifically meant for him. The fire in his life hadn't been extinguished, but it had changed. Instead of a destructive blaze, it was becoming a refining flame, Esther, shaping him into the man God intended him to be. Chapter 6. A New Vision. One evening, while sitting on his porch, Daniel had an idea that struck him like lightning. Over the years, he had seen how the tech industry could be a force for good, but also a source of endless stress and disconnection. He thought back to his early days at the company, when he had been filled with excitement and a sense of purpose. Somewhere along the way, that excitement had been replaced by the relentless pursuit of profits and success. But what if there was a way to combine his expertise in technology with his growing desire to help others? Daniel envisioned starting his own company, one that would focus on creating digital tools to improve mental health and well-being. He had seen firsthand how stressful modern life could be, and he believed that technology could play a role in helping people find balance, peace, and even spiritual growth. It was a daunting idea, but as he prayed for wisdom, Daniel felt a strong sense of peace. He wasn't sure how it would happen, but he trusted that God would open the doors if this was the right path. Proverbs 16 verse 3 echoed in his mind. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans. Daniel knew that he had to take a leap of faith. He shared the idea with Sarah, who, to his surprise, was incredibly supportive. They both prayed over the decision. And though there was fear, there was also hope. Hope that this new chapter could be the one that would bring Daniel true fulfillment, not just success. Chapter 7. The Leap of Faith. Taking the leap into entrepreneurship was one of the most difficult decisions Daniel had ever made. He had spent over a decade in the corporate world, where the path was clear and stable, at least in theory. Starting his own company meant stepping into the unknown, with no guarantees of success. But Daniel had learned to trust God's timing, and after much prayer and deliberation, he resigned from his position at the tech company. The reaction from his colleagues was mixed. Some admired his courage, while others thought he was making a huge mistake. But Daniel was at peace with his decision. He had learned that faith doesn't always mean playing it safe. It means stepping out of the boat like Peter and walking toward Jesus, even when the waters are turbulent. Daniel believed that God had placed this vision on his heart for a reason, and he was determined to follow through. In those early days, things were far from easy. Funding was scarce, and there were moments when Daniel doubted whether he had made the right decision. Yet, every time he felt overwhelmed, something would happen to remind him that he wasn't alone in this journey. A random connection would lead to a potential investor, or a new piece of technology would fall into place at just the right moment. God's hand was visible in the small victories, and Daniel learned to celebrate each one as a reminder of God's faithfulness. Chapter 8. The Power of Perseverance. Months turned into a year, and Daniel's new company slowly began to take shape. The journey was anything but smooth. There were setbacks, rejections, and moments of self-doubt. But through it all, Daniel held on to his faith. He had come to realize that God wasn't just interested in the end result. He was shaping Daniel's character through the process. The fire that had once felt overwhelming was now refining him, teaching him perseverance, patience, and humility. Daniel often thought about the story of Moses leading the Israelites through the wilderness. Just as Moses had faced countless challenges and opposition, so too was Daniel finding that the path to fulfilling his vision was filled with obstacles. But like Moses, he trusted that God was leading him toward the promised land, even if he couldn't see it yet. Whenever Daniel felt discouraged, he returned to Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. This verse became his anthem, a reminder that his strength didn't come from within, but from God. And just as God had seen him through the darkest moments of his corporate life, he would see him through this new chapter as well. Chapter 9. A Light in the Darkness. As the company began to gain traction, Daniel started receiving feedback from users. His platform, designed to help people navigate stress, anxiety, and burnout, was making a real difference. People from all walks of life were finding hope and healing through the tools he had created. Daniel was overwhelmed by the positive impact his work was having on others, and it reminded him of why he had taken the leap of faith in the first place. One user, a young man struggling with depression, wrote to Daniel, saying that the platform had helped him reconnect with his faith and find purpose in life again. Another, a single mother, shared how the mindfulness tools had helped her manage the overwhelming stress of balancing work and parenting. Daniel was moved to tears by these stories. He realized that God had been working through him all along, using his talents and experiences to bring light into the lives of others. Isaiah 40:31 became Daniel's new guiding verse. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. The challenges were still there, but Daniel's faith had been renewed. He saw the fire not as something to be feared, but as something that had refined him and brought him closer to God's purpose for his life. Chapter 10: Faith Through the Fire. Years later, Daniel looked back on his journey with gratitude. The fire that had once threatened to consume him had in fact refined him in ways he couldn't have imagined. His company had grown beyond his wildest dreams, impacting thousands of lives. But more importantly, Daniel had grown as a man of faith. He had learned that true success wasn't measured by titles or financial gain, but by the lives you touch and the faith you keep. He had walked through the fires of stress, doubt, and uncertainty, but through it all, God had been by his side. Like the heroes of faith before him, Daniel had discovered that the fire wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace, knowing that God uses the flames to shape us into who we're meant to be. Daniel's journey wasn't over, but he knew now that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with faith. God had carried him through before, and he would do it again. Daniel often shared his story with others, encouraging them to trust God through their own fires, knowing that on the other side of the flames, there was always hope. Hebrews 12:1-2 resonated deeply with him. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. Daniel knew that his race wasn't yet finished, but with God as his guide, he would keep running, trusting in the one who had been faithful through every fire.